Hi, everybody. Welcome to our class. I hope by now you feel comfortable with the way things are going to work. I hope you've read your syllabus and watched the videos that are posted for you and even taken a look at some of the handouts that are available. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. This presentation is intended to help you. Skip through it as you need to, but realize that I am intentionally going to talk about things that I've seen create problems for students in the past. Uh, and so I want to help you. And we are going to learn about literary analysis and close reading and how to read literature as a student of Christianity. So we have to begin with the purpose of this activity. And hopefully every activity within this course is something that you will understand and will see the purpose of. If you don't know why you're doing something, there's not much point to it, even if it's a good activity, even if it's an interesting activity. In a literature class, you have to be able to analyze literature. I think that goes without saying, but some students really don't understand what that means. Now, analyzing, means to, from chemistry class. It means to look at the components of something. And in chemistry, you're actually sometimes taking things apart, taking apart a compound to understand the constituent parts. So here you have the PLO, the Program Learning Objective for this course. And it's called CR. That's the shorthand. And it means close reading. Now, maybe you've heard that term before. Maybe it's something that a high school teacher mentioned at one point or a college professor. But generally speaking, when people read in the general public, they're just reading for enjoyment or they're reading for pure information. They're not reading to soak up everything that's in a text. And this seems artificial, and sometimes it seems a little bit bothersome to some people, to some learners, especially if you come from another field, a scientific field, a business field, and you're looking for a no-nonsense approach. This seems like extra baggage that a teacher is adding to something that could be enjoyable or that could be useful, and it's not. It doesn't seem as useful. So here we have it. The program learning objective, the PLO, that is called CR, is the following statement. Students describe, summarize, and analyze texts from a variety of academic disciplines. Okay, so you've got three things that you should be able to do by the end of this program or course. And the first one is to describe. You should be able to explain what kind of text you're dealing with. And that we will have self-paced lessons where you learn about genres. You'll learn about poetry. You'll learn about epic poetry specifically, which is the Iliad. And you'll learn about allegory, which is prose fiction. And it's a specific kind of writing that was done a lot in, starting with Shakespeare's time and even back into the Middle Ages. But, the Renaissance forward was a time where people were trying to almost imitate the Bible's parables. I mean, that's kind of what's happening. So describe what kind of text you're dealing with. 2, to summarize, you need to know what's going on. And this is problematic for a lot of students because they don't get the language. It's too old-fashioned. It's hard to understand what's going on. And I want to just tell you that there are so many tools online to help you with this. Summarizing should not be something you do totally by yourself, although you should attempt it. You don't always want to be writing with training wheels. And so you want to try to summarize on your own, but feel free to go and cross-reference and check online resources like SparkNotes, Cliff's Notes, Wikipedia even. I mean, there are plenty of resources to give you a summary of one of these classic texts. But the third thing, as we said, is analysis. To analyze texts means to unpack them or to decompose them, to take apart the composition or the compound that is the text. And you're breaking it into parts. And just like in science, When you break apart a compound, you're left with elements. When you break apart water, you have hydrogen and oxygen. And so that's really what you're doing when you analyze. And when it says from a variety of academic disciplines, well, you've got a pair of courses that you're taking hypothetically right now, your theology course and your literature course. And because of that, you're seeing things from different directions. And that's why the subtitle of this presentation is, reading literature as a student of Christianity. There's a certain way to read literature, starting with the Bible and the Bible's literature, but then extending to all of the literature that we have in our world. In the Western world, the European world, we know that literature is highly influenced by Christianity, and so you need to know that. But we hope that you can even go deeper and understand the inner workings of Christianity and the message that's coming through. So maybe you need to read the Iliad as a student of theology and understand how people are constructing a worldview. And so that is very important as we look forward to the final paper that you'll be writing. You are reading a work of literature that is not Christian, but you are interpreting it through the lens of Christianity. But you can also look at things as a sociologist or as a political scientist. Those are things that really, I think, enhance our study of literature. When we look at the political world of a piece of literature and understand how much the context impacts the writing. A story like the Iliad was based on Greek culture. And if you don't start to understand Greek culture, you're not going to understand the story very well. And especially the intricacies of the story, the relationships between men and women. And so you have, the whole field of gender studies. How are women portrayed? Where do they find power, or where are they denied power within a text? That's something that is very important to every human being, and I believe as Christians we need to address this. We need to see how this fits into the scheme of God's creation and what He intended for humanity. So that is our overarching purpose. That is where we are headed, but it's also the reason for all of these literary analysis assignments. You'll have 4 of them, and that means that, basically the first 4 weeks that we have, week 2, 4, 6, and 8, you're going to be submitting one of these literary analysis assignments. And the first one's due at the end of this week. Okay, you can see my little bobblehead professor face here. I'm hoping that face might guide you just a little bit as we go through a checklist that I think will help you be successful as you do the writing assignments for this course. So you can see there are 2 sections, one for the Iliad and one for the Pilgrim's Progress. And what I want you to understand is that there are subtle differences between the 2. So we're going to go through both lists of 5 here. We'll try and do it quickly. Number 1, you have to choose a section of the book you're reading. And for the Iliad, this means lines of poetry. And there are numbers along the left-hand side to guide you. So you want to choose 25 to 75 lines of cohesive poetry. And when we say cohesive poetry, we mean poetry that sticks together, not just a random section that you choose by closing your eyes and pointing to the text, right? You're choosing something that strikes you as you're reading. And one of the things I'll say up front is, how do you choose? You need to have your metaphor chosen for Professor Zank. And so please choose your metaphor and then try and find something that fits that metaphor from the text. The reason for this is because you are headed for a culminating paper, and that culminating paper can be something that is woven together over the course of our 10 weeks together. And the things that you weave together are your analysis assignments. Now, you won't always be able to use everything that you have accumulated as we go through the course, but you should be able to have good raw material for the eventual paper. So these analysis assignments are like Legos that you're putting together, and then at the end, you're going to have a structure that is your final paper. So be thinking about that as you make choices. You don't want to choose just something random each time. You want to choose something that fits your metaphor. Now, I will give you some leeway, okay? If you change your mind regarding your metaphor and, things just maybe are different from week to week, I can handle that for the literary analysis assignments, but it's going to make your job later much more difficult. So you choose the lines of poetry. Then, number 2, you consider the genre. You consider that you're talking about poetry. Now, poetry is a very special kind of writing, and words are chosen very carefully. And there are patterns within the lines of poetry. And so you want to make sure that you connect the dots, that you see the patterns. And so, poetry has certain conventions that you need to address. The form of a poem is very specific and special, and that's what an epic poem is. You'll be learning about that. But you also want to see that poetic language is often the language of metaphor or simile. We talk about epic similes. And similes and metaphors are very similar. It's both of them are figurative language. Another example is personification. When you make something that's not alive come to life, that's personification. So you can address that because it's poetry. So don't forget to mention at some point that you're dealing with poetry and that is special language. Okay, number 3, indicate the context. This is actually where I would start in your introduction. In the first couple of sentences in your analysis assignment, you want to make sure that you talk about what happened before your lines and what happens after your lines. What is the surrounding situation that the writer creates for your lines? It's kind of like the nest, and your lines that you choose are the egg that you are zooming in on. And so you need to know what the context is, and you need to mention it. So you might say, in book 12 of Homer's The Iliad, Achilles is approaching his enemy. Something like that. Now, you'll notice right away that I'm using present tense to describe this context. So, when you consider the genre and when you indicate context, you're actually doing the first part of our PLO, the CR, the close reading. You are doing that. You're describing the text. Now, the second thing is you need to summarize any action, but don't let summary overwhelm your writing. Summary and analysis are two very different things. Summary is just telling the events of a story, or it's, basically itemizing the points. If you're reading an essay and you summarize an essay, then it's not going to be a story, but you're going to be itemizing, kind of like a laundry list, the points of the author. So we're doing the program learning objective. We're doing it right here. And now, number 4, we get to analysis, and that should be the bulk of your writing. So when we talk about how long your writing is, and we say that you need to have 300 to 500 words, just know 300 to 500 words is approximately 1 full page, double-spaced with indenting, using 12-point or 11-point font in a word processing program like Microsoft Word or Pages, or Google Docs is actually my preferred way for you to do your assignments. So if you can get in the habit of using Google Drive and Google Docs, that will be best. And the reason for this is we can communicate very clearly. I'm going to be sharing a folder with you on Google Drive that will help you keep track of all of your assignments and your work and my feedback. So 300 words is the minimum, 500 words is the maximum, and that's really a page and a half. If you get to 2 pages, you may be going a little bit overboard, but I don't have a problem with that, because honestly, you're building raw materials. You're digging up raw materials for later use. And as long as you're continuing to, describe and summarize and then mainly analyze, those are the things you need to be doing. And so number 4, it says address each element in turn. Syntax. Syntax is basically the words that are used in sentences to make meaning. And so how you put words together is called syntax. And if you have questions, that's a certain kind of syntax, and it makes you feel a certain way. We talk about rhetorical questions, right? Questions that have an obvious answer, where it's making a point, it's being persuasive. Sometimes you have a statement in a poem that says, "Oh, how wonderful these birds outside my window are." Some silly thing like that. That is kind of an inverted syntax, and it makes you experience wonder with the speaker of the poem. By the way, when you talk about a poem, you need to talk about the speaker. Now, this is unique. When you talk about a story, you're going to talk about the narrator, but a poem should have a speaker. Okay, so syntax is how the words are put together, whether it's questions or exclamations or just statements. The diction is the specific word choice. That means, do you choose the word shack, like the book that everybody's reading and the movie that's out, The Shack? Or do you choose the word mansion? And what difference does it make when you choose between those two words? What kind of connotations are you introducing? Okay, imagery is actually, I believe, the most important thing that you're going to be looking at. Imagery has to do with your 5 senses, okay? Taste, touch, sight, sound, and feeling, and smell. Sorry, I missed smell there, so I said touch and feeling. So you got 5 senses, but you also want to see word pictures. And so certain words are used to create a picture in your mind. Pictures made with words. That's imagery. And what happens in writing, in literature, is that authors will use certain kinds of imagery. They might use imagery from agriculture, or from war, or from travel on the ocean. And sometimes it's very literal. They use imagery from the ocean because you're on the ocean. But other times they're describing something that's totally different. And that's where we shift into what's called metaphor or figurative language. When you're using imagery for an ocean to describe an army, and there's no ocean, right there. So to describe the army as waves on an ocean, that's using metaphor. And that's what literature is best at. And for people who are no nonsense and just, want the facts, sometimes that can be annoying and it can be off-putting. And so I hope that this isn't a dark valley that you have to go through trying to figure out literature. I hope that it can be rewarding as you address these elements within poetry. Now, the most unique thing about this assignment is that you should end with your thesis. This is not usually the case, but there's a reason for this. Your literary analysis assignments are like Legos, as I said, and you are putting them together. So it's not necessarily seen as an entire essay on its own. But when you end with a thesis, you're setting yourself up for putting those Legos together. And honestly, that's also what you should do in an essay. You shouldn't introduce your thesis in the very first sentence of your essay. It should come at the end of your introduction. I think that one thing that's missing from a lot of student writing is the idea of closure. That everything that you have introduced, all the little things that you've noticed about the syntax, diction, imagery, or metaphor, sometimes it's just kind of thrown out there and then there's no closure. There's no reason that all of this is being used. So you've got to kind of funnel down to a thesis, and the thesis should be a clear statement at the end of your literary analysis assignment. It should be one sentence, and that one sentence should be an SOS statement. Okay, we'll talk about this again in a second. Basically, it should be specific, it should be opinionated, and it should be significant. Those three things are very important. So remember, a thesis should be clear. It should jump out at the reader, which is basically me for now, but it is not something that you assume we understand from reading through what you've written. Okay? Now, I'm going to go quickly through the second list because it's a lot of repeat. First, for Pilgrim's Progress, you choose 1/2 to 1 page of prose. And again, you don't just reproduce the prose. I should be able to see the beginning point and the end point from quotations that you use from your writing, from your text in your writing. And so you consider the genre. You'll be learning about allegory and how there are basically two levels to an allegory. There's a literal level and a very figurative or deep structure that you need to be addressing. You need to indicate the context in the first few sentences. That's basically your introduction. And then you address each element in turn. Syntax, diction, imagery, metaphor. CDIM is what I have kind of called it. I don't have a fancy metaphor for or an acronym for that, unless you want to, you could say Midas, metaphor, imagery, diction, maybe analogy. That's kind of metaphor, and syntax. Okay, so we could create a fun acronym there. And again, you want to end with the thesis. Just remember that in your 300 to 500 word analysis, I would assume that you'd have more than one paragraph because of the length. If you want to keep it all one paragraph, I'm not going to knock you down for that, but just know you do have to have an indent for your paragraph. Write it as you would write normal academic writing. Okay, so that's our checklist, and that's the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. Okay, so I was able to cover a lot on the last slide, and I don't want to overwhelm you with all the details up front. I just want to encourage you to dig in. Dig into the text. Find something that's interesting to you and connect it to a larger picture, a big picture, which should be your metaphor that you're choosing for Professor Zank and getting cleared by him. So you should be emailing him, contacting him to get your metaphor cleared. He generally would like only one person to do each metaphor. And so you should have the metaphors now. I believe he introduced them in his class, and you have them posted on week 1 of my class. And also, that information, I can give it to you if you need it. All right. So here is what you need to be doing for your literary analysis assignment, 300 to 500 words. These are 6 things that you should remember. Number 1, when you read, you're reading through lenses, just like my silly reading glasses that I have on. The lenses that you read through might be a Christian lens. In this case, that would be very appropriate. You might read through a sociological lens or a political lens, a lens of gender, a lens of history. There are all kinds of things that you can use to read a text. And so make sure that you at least consider what is your purpose for trying to understand the Iliad or the Pilgrim's Progress. Number 2, don't forget to use your Bible metaphor as you create these 4 literary analysis assignments. When you do that, you are setting yourself up for success later on. Now, each of these assignments is not worth very much, only a few points. But this is called formative assessment. I am able to give you feedback, and it won't be lengthy feedback, but it will be basic feedback related to these 6 things or some of the other things that I said on the other page on the checklist. Please follow the rubric that I have posted for you. Read through the rubric. Try to understand the rubric. If you have questions about it, please contact me. You must try to use your Bible metaphor, and that is how you create a thesis. Number 3, you craft a thesis that says something specific about your Bible metaphor. It should be an opinion. It should not be something that's so obvious, like in the Iliad there is a lot of fighting. Well, that is not something that's going to be debated. There's obviously a lot of fighting. Make it an opinion. What does the fighting mean? What's the purpose? What value does it have? And that's, again, where you go back to your literary lenses. What were the causes? What were the effects? That's something that can help us, guide us as we're writing. So make it opinionated. This is one sentence, remember. It's not a whole paragraph. This is one sentence that is your thesis statement. It should be an obvious statement that is specific, opinionated, and finally significant. It should be something that connects to the context, the larger context of Greek literature, of their worldview, which is a pre-Christian worldview. And when we get to the Pilgrim's Progress, that is a Christian or post-Reformation worldview. And that's something that we will talk as much as we can about in our live sessions. And be ready to ask questions if you don't understand what pre-Christian and post-Reformation mean. That's critical to understanding your big paper that you'll be producing piece by piece, Lego by Lego, as we go through the course. Number 4, you want to unpack the text. When we say unpack, we mean that you're doing a close reading. You're looking at the Midas elements, okay? The ones that we mentioned on the checklist. You want to make sure you address those. If you don't address those elements, you're going to have a hard time. It's the vocabulary of our field, literature. It would be as if you went into a science class and didn't know, what an element was or what a compound was, and you just say the thingy that is joined with another thingy. You've got to have the working vocabulary to produce a successful analysis in a literature class. Okay, so you may not find every element. So when we say unpack the text, you kind of go where the text guides you, but I would assume that you'd have probably 2 or even 3 of the elements that are listed under the checklist. Now I want to talk a little bit about number 5. You need to use MLA format. I am a stickler for this because I have seen that if I'm not, that it drifts. And I don't think this is good for anybody, especially if you're going into a medical career. You're supervising personnel, physicians, whatever. They will not want you to drift. So being specific and adhering to certain guidelines is very critical. MLA is different from APA, and it's different from Chicago or Turabian style. Those are probably the 3 main styles that are used in academics. And you need to know that MLA is the one that is used most widely for English classes. I want to make sure you know where to find the guidelines. There is a site online called OWL, O-W-L. It stands for Online Writing Lab at Purdue, P-U-R-D-U-E University. And they are known. They've been around for 20 years. I have used that site as a teacher for 20 years because it's very straightforward. It helps students understand all of the specifics. Pretend that you are reading the instructions on a bottle of medication that's been prescribed. If you do not take that medication exactly as the doctor prescribes it, you will run into trouble. And so MLA is your prescription. This isn't my personality. It's really a practical side of me that needs to teach you that there are rules and you've got to learn how to follow them. So please do not go freely with this. One of the most important ones is the headings. If you go to OWL at Purdue, you will find the correct headings for any academic writing assignment. There are 4 lines on the left-hand side, and there's also an upper right-hand running header, which is your last name only, and then a space, and then an inserted page number. If you're not familiar with how to insert a page number in Google Docs, it's very easy. You just go to insert page number, and then it gives you a choice of where to put the page number. I can talk through some of this in our class because I want you to get it right. I don't want this to be something that you lose, a point for here or there, but I will hold you accountable for the MLA format. Generally speaking, we're using the most up-to-date MLA format, and that means the 8th version or the 8th edition. Now, if you use the 7th edition, I'm not going to mark you down. As long as you are consistent throughout your writing assignments, please follow this carefully. And I'll say again, MLA is very different from APA. I will never ask you to have a title page until we get to the very last big writings, big paper. So please do not put in a title page. These literary analysis assignments are quite short. You do not need to use MLA formatting for your postings online, but I do want to say this, that one of the formatting guidelines for MLA for your literary analysis assignments is to use double spacing and to use correct indents for paragraphs, and that means 0.5 inch. You just hit tab and it'll bump it over 0.5 inches. I see these things not done, and so I'm going to tell you now, please follow the rules carefully. I would recommend that you go Google samples of MLA papers, something like that, and you'll find a little variety, but for the most part, the same basic elements. Another thing is how you write the date. And finally, how you cite direct quotations. And I would like you to use a lot of direct quotations in your literary analysis assignments. Why? Because I don't want you to just be saying what you think. I want you to give me evidence from the text. And so that means that you need to have short quotations and have many short quotations. Don't even copy an entire sentence. Just copy 2 or 3 words in most cases, and have 2 or 3 together so that I can start to see a pattern. Again, it's like connecting the dots. The last thing is important. Just because it's last doesn't mean it's not important. And I say that you are speaking or writing in the ghostly present tense. Now, by ghostly, I'm actually telling you something that I am researching for my own studies as a PhD student. I want you to know that it's almost like when you read literature, it's coming to life, and it's coming back to life around you, and it's actually happening. It's not something that is in the past, and so you don't use past tense unless it's a word in a direct quotation. You're not going to change a direct quotation to be present tense, but you want to say things like Homer writes. You don't say Homer wrote. You don't say Achilles fought. You say Achilles fights. Achilles cries, which he doesn't, which is very important to know. What is going on around you in the text? It's almost like somebody is leading you on a guided tour of the text, and you see it happening around you in the present tense. We call it the literary present. So you may see my comments on your writing. Maintain the literary present tense. Okay, I think we've all had enough, and I hope that this is helpful. I hope you have time to watch this and kind of digest it before our class on Thursday, and certainly before you turn in your analysis assignment on Friday. Remember that the pieces of your culminating paper will be happening at the very end of the week on Saturday nights. And remember your postings as well, and follow the guidelines for those. Don't have less than what is specified in the syllabus. I pray that God blesses you as you go through the work of this course, and don't worry, don't be intimidated. Literature can be fun if we find something fun in it that appeals to us. So have a great day wherever you're at.